Welcome to Novelist Spotlight. This is Mike Consul, your host. In addition to being the host of this podcast and interviewing novelists, I am a novelist myself. I have 3 published novels. My latest is titled Lolita Firestone, a supernatural novel, and it is set in Sedona, Arizona and Cairo, Egypt. My previous novel is titled Family Recipes, a novel about Italian culture, Catholic guilt, and the culinary crime of the century. And my first novel is named Hardwood, a novel about college basketball and other games young men play, and that story deals with issues ranging from depression and racism to sex, religion, and university politics. All 3 novels are listed in the episode notes. I hope you will buy them, I hope you will read them, and I hope you will thoroughly enjoy them. Now, on with our program. In the spotlight is Graham Greene, the legendary British novelist, one of the greats of his generation. He died in 1991 at age 86. I just finished one of his biographies. It's called The Unquiet Englishman, A Life of Graham Greene. It was written by Richard Greene, who is no relation to the famous author despite the same name, including the same spelling. Greene with an E on the end. Graham's writing career spanned 67 years. It included more than 25 novels that explored the conflicting moral and political issues of the modern world. He was awarded the Shakespeare Prize in 1968 and the Jerusalem Prize in 1981. He was also shortlisted for the Nobel Prize several times, though he never had it bestowed upon him. Now, from that biography that I just completed reading, The Unquiet Englishman, I want to read to you here in a few moments what Graham Greene had to say about writing a novel. He described it in a way I've never heard it described before. I think it might be useful to anybody who writes. Before I get to that, some of his big titles have included Brighton Rock, The End of the Affair, one of my favorites, The Power and the Glory, The Comedians, Our Man in Havana, The Heart of the Matter, and so on. Of course, I learned a lot about Graham Greene, the man, the mental illness that dogged him, something I didn't know about. That was something that brought him to the point of suicide several times during his life. But he was a devout Catholic. I think that's one of the elements in his life that may have forestalled an actual suicide. Suicide is not allowable in the Catholic religion. He was a devout Catholic. I recall from the bio that one of his friends was asked by somebody, how do you think Graham will be writing in 20 years? How will his writing change in 20 years? And he said, he'll be dead in 20 years. He's going to kill himself. The people around him, his friends, his acquaintances, they knew that he was suffering from emotional disturbance and that he was a guy who talked about killing himself. Now, what's interesting is he traveled to a lot of dangerous places during his career. I didn't realize how political he was, very political. He visited places such as Mexico, Vietnam, Cuba, Havana, Cuba, Haiti, and the Congo during periods of time when they were dangerous places. So it left me to wonder if he didn't just feel like, well, I want to kill myself anyway. If I do end up dead, then that's been taken care of. I can't do it by my own hand because the Catholic Church forbids that. Now, this is me talking, not him. But it stands to reason that there's a couple forces that may have very well kept him alive. Again, he lived to age 86. So despite people thinking he was doomed, it didn't quite work out that way. He was also a sex addict, and I guess other biographies spent a lot of time on his sex life. And now Richard Greene, the author of this particular biography, said they were going to dispense with that. Even so, there was plenty of sex in this book. You definitely got the impression that Graham Greene was a guy who had long-term relationships, but also he needed those transitory relationships, those sexual interactions as well. Now, to get to my point on what he had to say in this book, again, that I think is of use to anybody who's an aspiring novelist or a current novelist. So Graham Greene was talking to a priest named Father Leopold about his experience of writing a novel and how he could only shut down the urge to write by taking sleeping pills and going to bed. That's how obsessed he was with writing. He couldn't shut his mind down. He had to go to sleep. He had to take the sleeping pills. He had to go into repose to get away from that writing instinct. I just saw an interview, Howard Stern with Ed Sheeran, the singer, songwriter, performer, very famous, very well liked. And one of the things he said is, if you're going to be an artist, you need to be obsessed. You need to be obsessed with what you're doing. He didn't say a songwriter, he said an artist. A lot of different forms of art, including writing novels. Clearly, Graham Greene was obsessed. The other thing Ed Sheeran said that I think is worth sharing is that he said he's always writing. He doesn't decide it's time for a new album, I'm going to sit down and write. He writes about whatever's happening in his life. He writes songs based on that. That doesn't mean they all get produced. It doesn't mean that they all end up on an album. But what it does mean is that he makes the songwriting process part of his life. And the act of writing continuously builds the skill, the songwriting or storytelling skills that are essential. And I think there's many novelists out there who do the same, who are writing all the time, and they're writing about their own lives a lot of the time, maybe fictionalizing them a little bit, working on those skills. So getting back to Graham Greene, he explained to Father Leopold, actually described the sheer intuitiveness of his work by saying, and I quote from Graham Greene, "A novel is a work in which characters interrelate. It doesn't need a plot. The novelist's own intervention must be very limited. What happens to the author of a novel is rather like a pilot of a plane. The pilot needs to get the plane off the ground. Once it is in the air, the pilot does virtually nothing. Once everything has started working, the characters begin to impose themselves on the author, who is no longer in control of them. They have a life of their own. The author has to go on writing. Sometimes he writes things which appear to have no raison d'etre. Only when the author intervenes to allow the plane to land is it time for the novel to end." End quote. Well, good for Graham Greene. I have never had the experience of simply getting the novel started and having it basically take care of itself, like autopilot, and having my characters take control, tell me which direction they want to go. Now, have I experienced that to some degree? Absolutely. Have I experienced it to the degree that was just explained there by Graham Greene? Absolutely not. But it goes to show why he was such a skilled author, that this is a process that was very close to him. It was a process that sounds very natural to him. Yes, he was obsessed with writing, but the writing process after getting that plane in the air, as he says, or landing the plane, being the only two times the author really intervenes, but that whole air time in between, when that plane is at altitude, the novel takes care of itself. The characters start living their own lives, and things move along. No, I really like the fact that he says a novel is a work in which characters interrelate. It doesn't need a plot. Because I read a lot of books that don't have a whole lot of plot. And it's exactly because I'm interested in the characters and the vignettes and their interactions. That's what was really of value to me. That's what really drives my reading, not necessarily a plot. A plot's nice to have. Oftentimes, though, a book feels like it's all plot, and no character. I'm sure you've had the experience. I've got some places you can go in the episode notes to learn more about Graham Greene. Obviously, I've given you just a little bit of information, but there's a couple different websites that I have the URLs for, and I would encourage you to learn more about the great Graham Greene. He was a major influence on so many modern writers, including David Cornwell, who we know as John le Carré. For Novelist Spotlight, I'm Mike Consell. Thank you for listening.